Hello, Curious Kids! Welcome to Curious Kids HQ, where we dive into the wild, wacky, and wonderful world of learning. Today, we're taking a trip through time to discover something every student knows: school rules. Have you ever wondered why we have school rules and how they've changed over time? Well, get ready because we're about to find out. Let's go! Once upon a time, long before desks had pencil holders and school bells rang, there was still one thing every school had: rules. But these rules weren't always the same as the ones we know today. In fact, school rules have changed a lot over the centuries. Let's hop into our time machine and take a journey through the history of school rules. Are you ready? Here we go! Our first stop is ancient Greece, where schools were a little different from what we know today. In Athens, students, or pupils as they were called, didn't have textbooks or computers. Instead, they learned by listening to their teachers and repeating what they heard. The very first rule of school was simple but strict: always respect your teacher. Back then, teachers were seen as the wisest people around, and showing them respect was the most important rule. Students had to stand up straight and be very quiet while their teacher spoke. If they didn't follow this rule, they could be sent to practice more respectful behavior before they were allowed back into class. Now let's jump ahead to the Middle Ages, where schools were often run by the church. Here, school rules were even stricter. Monks and priests were usually the teachers, and students had to follow rules like no talking unless spoken to, sit up straight, and do not question your teacher. Education in these schools was seen as very serious business. Students spent hours sitting on hard wooden benches, memorizing Latin prayers and religious texts. If they broke a rule, they might have to stand in the corner for hours or even receive a tap on the hand with a wooden ruler. School rules in the Middle Ages were all about discipline and obedience. As we zoom forward to the 1700s, things start to look a little more familiar. Schools were becoming more common, but the rules were still pretty strict. In the American colonies, one of the most important rules was always arrive on time. Being late to school was a big deal because lessons couldn't start until everyone was there. And speaking of starting school, imagine this: there were no school bells. Instead, students had to keep track of time using the sun, or, if they were lucky, a town clock. Arriving late could mean extra chores like sweeping the classroom or even staying after school to help the teacher. So, students learned pretty quickly to be on time. In the early 1800s, as public schools began popping up in places like the United States and Europe, there was another important rule that students had to follow: no speaking out of turn. Schools were growing larger, and teachers had to manage bigger classrooms. This rule was meant to keep order and make sure everyone could hear the lesson. But this wasn't just a polite request. It was enforced with strict punishments. If a student spoke without raising their hand, they might be sent to the corner to wear a dunce cap, a tall, pointy hat that was meant to embarrass them in front of the class. Can you imagine being told to wear a silly hat for breaking a rule? As we continue our journey through time, we arrive in the late 1800s, where school rules started to focus more on behavior outside the classroom too. In Victorian England, for example, students had to follow rules like always walk, never run in the hallways, and keep your uniform neat and tidy. These rules were meant to teach students discipline and respect for authority. Boys were expected to wear their ties straight, and girls had to keep their dresses clean. If a student's uniform wasn't perfect, they might be sent home to fix it. The rules were all about teaching proper manners and making sure students behaved like young ladies and gentlemen. Now let's hop into the 20th century, where school rules became a bit more focused on safety and learning. In the 1950s and 60s, new rules started appearing in classrooms, like no chewing gum in class and no running in the halls. Teachers wanted to make sure students were paying attention and staying safe. After all, who wants to trip on a piece of gum stuck under their desk? If a student got caught chewing gum, they might have to write, "I will not chew gum in class," 100 times on the chalkboard. That sure would make you think twice before sneaking another piece. As we fast forward to the 1980s and 90s, school rules started to include more guidelines about respect and kindness. Rules like treat others as you want to be treated, and no bullying became important parts of the school day. Schools were beginning to focus more on creating a positive environment where everyone felt safe and welcome. Teachers and principals wanted students to understand that kindness mattered just as much as getting good grades. Breaking these rules might lead to a serious talk with the principal, or even a note sent home to parents. Schools were working hard to make sure that everyone learned in a friendly and supportive environment. And here we are in the present day. School rules today include all kinds of things, from no cell phones in class to no cyberbullying. With technology playing such a big part in our lives, schools have had to come up with new rules to keep students focused on learning and staying safe online. Today's school rules are designed to help students respect each other, stay safe, and make the most out of their education. And while they might seem strict sometimes, school rules are there to help everyone learn in a fun, safe, and respectful way. Looking back, it's amazing to see how school rules have changed over the years. From ancient Greece, where the rule was all about respecting your teacher, to today's schools, where rules help keep students safe and kind, we can see that school rules have always been a part of the learning experience. And while some of the old rules, like wearing a dunce cap or getting in trouble for a messy uniform, seem pretty silly now, they were all part of the journey to making schools what they are today. So, the next time you hear a school rule, whether it's about raising your hand, being on time, or staying off your phone, remember that these rules are part of a long history of learning. And who knows? Maybe one day you'll help create new rules for the schools of the future. Thanks for joining us on this awesome journey through the history of school rules. If you enjoyed learning about how rules have changed over time, be sure to give this video a big like. And don't forget to share it with your friends so they can join the fun too. Want to keep exploring with us? Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next adventure. Stay curious, kids, and see you next time at Curious Kids HQ.